Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Can I just check that everyone can hear me?
I can hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Margaret. Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming along to the symposium and for coming along to this session this afternoon. My name is Kate and I work at the Centre for Behavioural Economics, Society and Technology up at QUT in Queensland. So I'm zooming into you today from my office in Brisbane. My apologies if there are any hiccups with the internet, just jump in the chat and let me know. And of course, also coming to you from the BITA Centre at QUT as well, or BITA Centre. Okay, so I'd like to commence with an acknowledgement of the country on which I developed these slides and on which I'm zooming to you now. As QUT, we would like to acknowledge the First Nations owners of the lands where we gather today, paying respect to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits, and recognising that these lands have always been places of teaching, research and learning. We acknowledge the important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community. Okay, so we have a fairly packed session today. I tried to be as hands-on as possible, particularly in the latter section of the workshop. We might not get through everything, but the links that I've put into the slides will stay active, so we can always revisit them later. So today we'll go through a little bit of a welcome, some introductions. We'll talk about what is vulnerability, what is co-design, designing with those who are experiencing vulnerability, and then come to any questions. But if you have any questions throughout, feel free to pop them in the chat and I will try and keep an eye out for that as well. Okay. So as you've heard already, my name is Kate. I work up at the BEST Centre and the BITA Centre at QUT. And my background is in consumer psychology, and it's from that lens that I've come to research that looks at customers and consumers who might be experiencing vulnerability in a range of different guises. And without further ado, I would actually like to move to learning more about who's in the room with us today. I'll get everyone to, if you don't mind, join the Slido and I will have a couple of questions. Let me just see if I can start the presentation so that it gives you the proper QR code. One moment. Just switch back over. It's not going to help us there. 1 second. We'll try this one. Should still be displaying for everyone. Okay, there we are. You should now have the proper QR code and joining link for the Slido. These are just a couple of questions so that we can learn about who's in the room with us today. So if everyone could join that. Sorry, I have 3 screens going at once today to run the presentation, so you'll see me looking off to the side occasionally. Okay, so the first question is, who is in the room with us today? You can select as many of these as you'd like to select. We can see the results coming up live on the screen now. So are you an academic? Do you work in policy? Are you a consumer advocate, a consultant, a student? Do you work in an NGO or non-profit? Are you just interested? Are you some combination of all of the above? I think we have most people now. And we've got a really great mix in the room. That's awesome. So we have academics, we have policymakers, we have advocates, we have NGOs, we have consultants, we have students, and we have people who are just coming along because they're interested as well. So that's great. I bet everyone's sitting there very relieved at the moment that I didn't want to go around the room and do an icebreaker. But we still can if anyone wants to do one. Okay. And moving on to the next poll, which should now be active for you, I hope. How much co-design experience do you have? Okay, so I think we've again got most people in the room. So we have mostly people who are here to learn more or here to kind of start learning about co-design, which is great. And I'm sure some of you have run more co-design workshops than you could count, and you're just being modest and haven't selected that one as well. So wonderful. Lovely to meet everyone who is in the room. Thank you again for coming along. Okay, let's jump straight into it. What is vulnerability? And I know that this is a discussion point that obviously has come up a lot today, starting with the keynotes this morning and running all the way through. How do we define and approach the experience of vulnerability? So I come to vulnerability from the point of view of a marketer, from someone in consumer psychology, and looking at how we as businesses are interacting with people on a day-to-day basis who we see as customers, but who may be experiencing a range of different vulnerabilities at any one time. So the definition I have here is consumer vulnerability is a state of powerlessness that arises from an imbalance in marketplace interactions or from the consumption of marketing messages and products. It occurs when control is not in the individual's hands, creating a dependence on external factors like marketers. And it's up to us to create that fairness in the marketplace. Now, as I said, a very marketing-centric definition, but one of the key points that I wanted to call out is that vulnerability is a state of powerlessness or a state of an experience rather than a trait or an identity-based issue. So it's not who we are, but rather what we are currently experiencing at the time. And as I heard coming up at the keynotes and at other presentations today, we know that anyone can experience vulnerability at different points in their life, and that vulnerability can be lifelong or temporary, and it can vary in impact and severity as well. So there are a whole range of different ways in which we may experience we may experience vulnerability in our lives, and oftentimes may have already experienced, may currently be experiencing vulnerability. And as I said, experiences of vulnerability vary in duration and severity. I also like to include this as an example. So consumers who are experiencing stress, especially a lack of time, having to juggle multiple commitments, are also experiencing a form of vulnerability. Self-control, as we know, is a bit of a depleting resource. So we reduce our self-control throughout the day. We reduce the resources that we have to make optimum decisions. Being time poor can have a range of negative aspects. Why do I mention this when I talk about vulnerability? It's because often when we come to talking about experiences of vulnerability, we think, that's someone else, or that's only really severe vulnerability. But talking about the experience of vulnerability for someone who might be, a new parent is really sleep deprived, or a full-time student who's also juggling full-time work and trying to operate in the marketplace and make decisions at that time, is also another way that we can experience vulnerability. So this just gives an overview of the range of experiences we might have. I've also heard some of the sessions today talking about identifying vulnerability, which from a marketer's perspective is of great interest, because people experiencing vulnerability will not always self-identify, either because they don't identify as someone who's experiencing vulnerability, because they're not in crisis yet, they're in that lead up to it, so they may not realize, or just may have difficulty accessing the resources or knowing exactly how to say, hey, I'm seeking some support here. So organisations might look for certain actions or patterns of behaviour that indicate that help is needed and can provide easy access to resources. So this is just providing a bit of a background for kind of the marketing approach to dealing with vulnerability and being an ethical organisation. And I know a lot of this has already come up already. There was the example in the keynotes about the Women's Butterfly Project and identifying that vulnerability at really early phases and through different actors who might not necessarily have engaging with housing stress as part of their core job descriptions. Okay, so a bit of background for vulnerability, and I know I'm talking to people who know a lot about the experience of vulnerability and working with these people who are in the room now. Let's talk a little bit about co-design. So co-design, I like to present in opposition to more traditional approaches. So traditional approaches are what we see as expert-led, where as experts we come in and we use our strengths and our knowledge to say, okay, well, we've looked at the information, we've done the research, and this is what we think needs to happen, which is very valid to use our strengths as experts to create good in the world, absolutely. And we'll look at the co-design aspect of that in a moment. However, these traditional approaches often have weaker buy-in from users. There are fewer creative ideas. We have reduced decision-making. We have lower satisfaction and support from users, reduced knowledge of the user experience, and a lower likelihood of success. Whereas with co-design approaches, particularly where we are inherently user-led from the very beginning, even in terms of thinking about what actually is the problem that we're dealing with here, we see stronger buy-in from users, more creative ideas because we're bringing in diverse experiences, better decision-making, more satisfaction, more support, and overall a greater chance of success and a better user experience. So bringing in the people that we're actually designing for can be incredibly powerful to helping us come up with solutions that actually fit. So when we tend to use service design or co-design in the centre where I work at the moment, we use the double diamond approach, focusing on the discover, define, develop, and deliver phases. So this allows us to start from the very beginning and kind of extract any assumptions, look at the lay of the land, see what we might be assuming as the problem is not necessarily the problem. And ideally, we want to start including those actors that we're designing for all the way at this early phase, and we'll see why in a moment. So often with the discover phase, that might involve, yes, conducting a literature review or a grey search of the literature. Often includes talking to various stakeholders, brainstorming as a team about who's involved, who needs to be involved, all of these types of things. We then get down to, once we've got as much information as we can, trying to scope it down a bit and defining what actually is the environment, what are we creating, what are we working with, what kind of resources do we have? And then we kind of scope back out again and start to kind of engage in a bit of blue sky thinking, be as creative as possible, try and develop lots of different possibilities, lots of different solutions, which we then scope back down again through testing and validation. And with co-design, we want our users involved as much as possible and also various other stakeholders. Although I do say as much as possible because, as others have brought up during the sessions today, we also want to be respectful of the time and resources of the people that we're engaging with. Okay, so how do we go about actually designing for those and with those who are experiencing vulnerability? And I'm going to throw actually to you first. I know we have people here who have a lot of experience dealing with those experiencing vulnerability. We have people who have experience with co-design. What do you think is important when you're engaging in co-design? This is a kind of an open text response, but you'll see everyone's response as they come up. Give everyone a moment to think. It's a bit of a hard question to throw out. So I see we've got one in the chat so far. Knowing what benefits the user would like to see come from the design. Absolutely. Really important to think about benefits from the user's point of view. Involving the user in the co-design, making sure they know what it's about, being sensitive, listening empathetically, knowing their capacity and interest to participate, going beyond consultation to a true iterative approach, absolutely. User defining the problem, thinking about the environment and the medium, inclusive language, but authentic voices, yes. Have we missed any? Scroll down. Involving them in the design of the workshop, yes, rather than just inviting them once the workshop's already designed. Avoiding judgment, ensuring they feel safe and comfortable. listening, checking assumptions at the door, being aware of unconscious bias, transparency, shared benefits, being genuinely on the same level and considering power differentials, returning results to the participants, absolutely. Empathy and respect, yes. Our own experience and triggers, yes, because we're part of the process as well. See a few more people typing. Flexibility. Okay, fantastic. Thank you all so much for sharing your experience with us here. I absolutely agree with all of these. There's a lot to think about when you're engaging with co-design, with those experiencing vulnerability. But by that same token, we mentioned at the beginning the idea of consumers who are time poor or stressed or sleep deprived, which can be really common experiences of vulnerability. So I think it's worth engaging in research from that more accessible and considerate lens in general, even when you don't think you're dealing with traditional populations who are experiencing vulnerability. Yeah, and creating a safe space where people feel comfortable sharing experiences. Absolutely. Wonderful. We don't need the rest of the session. Everyone's got it nailed. I know you've already heard a lot about strengths-based approaches today, starting with the keynote and talking around avoiding that more deficit-based approach to people experiencing vulnerability and focusing instead on their strengths. And this is a really, really tricky mindset to stay within. I still continually catch myself using deficit-based lenses and approaches all the time, because that tends to be the innate way that we think about things. Is, as humans, we're very problem focused. You know, what is the problem? Who has a problem? What is their problem? So that we can fix it. But there is a different way to think about these things, and that's what we'll look at today, is a strengths-based set of guidelines to engaging in co-design with people experiencing vulnerability. So I have a couple of videos to show quickly, which hopefully will work. It's a good juxtaposition to show what I mean by strengths-based approaches. So here is what I've pulled out as kind of a traditional ad that you might see for shoes for elderly people to help increase stability. Let's see. Okay, so we might pause it there, but we've seen these types of infomercials or educational ads and so on before. Let's have a look at one that comes from a more strengths-based approach. Can't hear the audio of the video. Luckily, in this case, there was just music, but let me see if I can reshare and get that back for everyone. So don't worry, you just missed music in that one. Let me stop sharing. And I'll reshare and see how we go.
It had all the words on the screen, so we could follow that.
Oh, that's good. Thank you, Margaret. Okay, let's see. We'll just skip forward to that bit again. I'll just play a snippet of this and let me know if you can hear music.
Yes, can hear music.
Yes, excellent, because the next one has actual sound that we need. So that's our more kind of traditional approach, coming from a very deficit-based lens. Older people have difficulty with stability and vision and all of these types of things. Here is a different approach. huge difference. I don't know about everyone else, but watching the two ads and trying to put myself into a position where I'm thinking about my own mobility and stability and staying safe, I definitely want to buy the sneakers in the second ad more than the first. So still similar kind of product, sneakers, keeping you safe, keeping you healthy while you're out and being active, but really different approaches. Okay, so you might have heard mentioned in one of Rebecca's talks earlier about the Women's Butterfly project. So coming back and reflecting on the Women's Butterfly project, we found that there were kind of 5 guidelines that we had used when we came back over and over again and challenged ourselves to reflect and to move away from that deficit-based lens that helped us to stay in a strengths-based mindset. So these were reframing the issue, relating to the customer, revising the language, and rewiring the brain through reflection, and redesigning the method. So these are just guidelines, and everyone may apply these differently. And of course, it depends on the type of resourcing and so on that you have. But we'll go through these one by one, and I have a few kind of interactive digital activities that we can do on these as we go. So for anyone who is interested in learning more, the paper is Russell Bennett, Kelly Letheren and Chell 2023, or you can email me and I will send you a copy. Likewise, I see in the chat some people are interested in the results of the What's Important in Co-Design that we did earlier. If you email me, I can send you that list afterwards. Okay, so a couple of notes before we jump into the activities. I always like to say, think about what the ideal behaviour is. So what is the behaviour that we're hoping to achieve? And who is the person who wants that behaviour to happen or who benefits from it? And just checking whether that is the user or whether we're coming from an organisational problem perspective. Thinking about what gets in the way and what helps with that behaviour. Who are the people and what do their lives look like? So personas and customer journeys are really helpful co-design tools there. And considering once we've come up with our ideas and we're going through that second part of the diamond, that even the best intentions can lead to perverse incentives and other unintended consequences. So that's one of the really, really important reasons that we involve the user and other stakeholders as much as we can, because often they will see problems that we do not see. So, for instance, I am not fortunate enough to have children myself yet, but often I'll say to my friends who are parents, oh, well, if little Johnny and little Jessica are, you know, upset about this, why don't you just do it this way? And they just give me this look that's like, really? Because they are the experts of that experience and they can see in an instant why something that might seem, you know, foolproof to me would definitely fail. And I mentioned that as kind of a humorous example that hopefully we've all had where we've tried to provide advice and we're not the expert of that experience. And the person who is has instantly said, you know, it won't work because of this, or actually it would work, but we need to tweak it a little bit. And that's one of the real powers of co-design, is having that involvement. Okay, so I've put together a hypothetical case study for us to kind of use in the activities. So I'd like you to imagine that you work with a financial counselling organisation and you've set out to offer support to a small town that has just been affected by a flood. So the town's main export is agriculture. And while the record-breaking rain was initially a really good thing for the town, unfortunately, there has since been a flood and this has created issues. The fields are flooded and they don't know which crops are going to survive. Most houses have been inundated and are not safe. So any house that was not inundated is now playing host to families who have been displaced, and the medical and food supply lines have been disrupted. So the people in this town are experiencing a whole range of different vulnerabilities at the moment. So the issue that we've come across as, you know, the financial counselling organisation in this hypothetical is that despite us advertising on local radio, using flyers, using the internet, very few townspeople are actually accessing our financial counselling service, which is quite baffling to us because we can provide information on how to deal with stopping payments and dealing with bills while they're going through this. We can help them with insurance claims. So we're not sure why there's no engagement. So who we're trying to serve are the townspeople who are affected by natural disaster. And of course, we're in that financial counselling mindset at the moment. So let's work through the 5 R's and have a look at how we might co-design with this population. So the first step is, or the first guideline is reframing the issue. So switching from looking at problems to be solved, and you'll notice I've already framed it as a problem to be solved. No one is engaging with our services. And instead seeking the resources and capabilities to be drawn upon to make something in their world better. So something in the world of these townspeople. We don't want to ignore the difficulties faced. So this isn't about toxic positivity and pretending that there hasn't been a flood and there hasn't been vulnerabilities, but rather choosing to define people by their strengths rather than defining them by their problems. Issues should be situation-based, not identity-based. And importantly, we have to be critical of whose issue we're actually trying to solve. So the issue that I gave you before about people not engaging with our advertising, is that the user's issue or is that our issue as the organisation? So I'd like to invite everyone to join me on a Padlet. I will also pop the link in the chat for people who are accessing on computer like I am. It'll be a little bit easier. So this activity is around actually coming towards that reframing of the issue. Just open a chat window and pop that in there. So this is the link we are currently at. And I'll go ahead and share so that we can all see the Padlet at the same time. Okay, yes, wonderful, that is working. Great. So what we're doing here is using the plus symbol that we can see underneath each of the column headings to add our thoughts. So we want to come up with what is the organisation's problem in our hypothetical, what's the customer or the user problem, and what is our strengths-based issue reframing. So I've started with a marketing example because it's a good way to kind of get started thinking about this. So if I were someone selling soft drinks by the side of the road, I might say, I need to sell more drinks because people are walking past my store and they're not coming in. That's my problem. That's not the problem of the customer out on the street. The customer problem might be, I get thirsty when I'm commuting to work in the mornings. So our strengths-based issue reframing might be, our customers are on the go. How might we best fuel them? How might we best support them? So with our issue of the flood, what is the organisation's problem? So what is the financial counselling organisation's issue? And we've already kind of introduced that. So we can add that by clicking the plus button and just adding your thoughts. And then we'll come to thinking about what is the problem for the townspeople. And those two things are probably going to be very different. I can see a range of people on the Padlet. It's great. I'll just keep refreshing so that we can see what's going on here. Wonderful. So the organisational issues for the person trying to sell soft drinks are very similar to the same organisational issue we have as a financial counsellor trying to get people to engage, is that people aren't uptaking the service, they're not engaging, they're not responding to our advertising, and we're not sure why. I can see some people are starting to switch over to the customer problem or the user problem. Yep, so that's one of them. On the one hand, we as the organisation are thinking about why are people not listening to our advertising? The customer is thinking, I don't know which ones my crops are going to survive. Very different mindset. Not sure if I'm going to have a home to go back to. My home is flooded. I'm in crisis mode. I'm really stressed. I'm really anxious. I'm embarrassed to ask for help. Life is chaotic. I'm overwhelmed. Don't know where I'm going to live. So a whole range of experiences of vulnerability. And you can see why engaging with advertising might not be a super high priority for people right now, even if it's advertising something that's going to help them. So coming to our strengths-based issue reframing, how can we reframe this so that we are addressing the user's issue from a position of strength? Someone's put, I have health issues that I need help with. Yeah, supplies, don't understand what I'm going through, need to feed my family, need medicines. Yeah, so we have a whole range of experiences. So we're seeing, I think, a lot of overwhelm, and we're seeing multiple issues. So we might say that from a strengths-based perspective, our townspeople are resilient and they are looking at ways to rebuild their lives. They are focused on immediate needs. So does anyone have anything for how we might come up with like a central issue for our customers that avoids falling into deficit as much as we can? So, for example, with one like the Women's Housing Stress and Homelessness Project that Rebecca was talking about during the keynote, we started out with something along the lines of, helping mature women avoid homelessness, and came to something along the lines of supporting mature women to maintain secure housing. So how might we support these townspeople? Yeah, getting back to living our lives, absolutely. I love that. Face-to-face communication, asking them what they're prioritising now. Yes. Talking to them from their perspective. Looking at their priorities, not our priorities. Granted, they are priorities that will align, but we have to look for the alignment here. I can see a couple more people still typing, so I'll leave this open a second longer. Where can I find straightforward, accessible solutions to help me get over this situation in the short term? How can I get access to information easily? Where are supports for people to get back on their feet? Sorry, there are supports. Yeah, reducing time, being more efficient in navigating financial issues. Yeah, absolutely. So I love the strengths-based approach here. So we're being efficient, we're getting back to living our lives, we are prioritising rather than we're being overwhelmed. So as the organisation, we can come to them from that lens of prioritising, offering, yes, easy access to information, helping to protect their family, speaking in their language about their issue as they're experiencing it, rather than our issue. So I'll leave that live for anyone who wants to jump in and continue. I can see people still typing there. That's great. And I'll just look back over to the slides. It's re-sharing. So probably start from the beginning again. My apologies, I'll just skip through. Okay, so that was reframing the issue. So the point of taking you through the hypothetical there is that it was really easy to see the organisation's problem because that's the lens that we're used to coming from. And then to reframe from the customer's position and to think, okay, how might we as the organisation stop thinking about our problem and start thinking about offering our strength to match the customer's strength to create that support. Okay, the next guideline that we have is relating to the customer. So we have to relate to the customer and have empathy for their experience. I can see a lot of relating to the customers and empathy in our for our hypothetical townspeople coming through in the last Padlet. Co-design really importantly privileges the voices of those who are experiencing the vulnerability, but it also has to recognise that we are part of the process as well. So we are kind of in the co-design, we have to be able to understand, to relate in order to work together, the co in the co-design. So often the types of tools that we will use here will be things like personas and customer journey mapping. I was listening to Liz's keynote this morning, which I thought was just great around moving away from demographics and into psychographics and thinking about experiences that are not tied to identity in terms of our personas and who our populations are. So I see some people can't access the Padlet. My apologies, I will continue sharing so that everyone can see that. So a little bit of background on personas. Consumers experiencing vulnerability are typically treated as passive recipients under the expert-led approach that we spoke about before. They may not be engaged by expert-led services at all. They might just have something designed for them. Co-creation can definitely assist with this, or co-design, but often uses personas that don't actually resonate with consumers experiencing vulnerability. So to support empowerment and engagement, we need to create personas that transcend those demographic variables, things like gender, age, ethnicity, disability, and income. So one of the ways that we have done this in the past with our projects is to use animals as guidance. Obviously, these are not some of our animal personas, but rather I've pulled that from Aesop's fables, because Aesop is a great example of why we might use animals. So while animals avoid stereotypes, there are often certain characteristics, strengths-based characteristics, that we associate with different animals. So they can be very inclusive, like looking at this picture. Apart from the clothing on some of the animals, it's really hard to gender them or to see age unless you wanted to age them. You can't tell an ethnicity from these images of animals, which can eliminate a lot of the biases and also makes the personas more relatable. So we have a set of personas. We have a few. One of my favorites is of households engaging with electricity. So one of the groups is the ant colony, because the family uses a really regimented approach, and they like routines and they like rules, and that's how they approach using electricity. Now, when we looked at the demographics, there's two different demographics that tend to gravitate towards that persona, and that's couples with children and solo households. So if we were to do traditional demographics-based personas or segmentation, where we had, the picture of the family with, mum, dad, and two kids, and the picket fence and the dog kind of thing, there would be a lot of households that say, well, that's not me. Even if you are part of a housemate situation where, yes, you do run things in that way, you wouldn't necessarily see yourself represented. So particularly when we're looking at external facing personas, animals can be really helpful there. And of course, we can feel quite connected to our persona. You would have seen some personas this morning in the Women's Butterfly Project as well. So enough background. Let's get into our activity. So again, we're on the Padlet, so I will pop the link into the chat and then I'll reshare so that we can all join. So this one is all about designing a persona for our townspeople. And granted, I've made it really hard for you by just saying townsperson rather than a particular group. You can make it more specific if you like, but granted, we're all working together on this one. So it'll be interesting to see what we come up with. Let me just change the share so we can follow. There we are. That's where we're meant to be. So fill the columns going across the page with, what do you think the personas issue is? So we've come up with a lot of starting points for this in our previous Padlet. What are their main barriers to behaving in an optimum way? What are their main motivators? And is there anything else we need to know? So as a starting point, I've said your persona is an affected townsperson. They value efficiency and they value social connections. So a couple of psychographics coming in there in the form of values, but not an awful lot to go on yet. So start designing the persona. Yes, it is a bit about imagination at this point, trying to imagine what they're going through. In real co-design, we would be talking to these personas, interviewing them, getting them to help actually create these personas in the beginning. Just refresh while people are typing. Love it. So persona issue, how to support the community connection at this time of strife. Yes, because they value social connections. They're thinking about their community at this point. Persona issue, it feels like a bit of a maze with mirrors. Yes, which would really upset personas who are valuing efficiency if they feel like everything's really complex and confusing. They're feeling really confused. They're getting conflicting information. The road to the town's cut off. They have no electricity. The battery to the radio is going to run out soon. They're feeling isolated. Yes, they would be feeling really isolated as someone who values social connections. Feeling lonely. They're feeling unsupported. wondering how long will it take. Yep, there's the efficiency coming out. I need order returned, it's chaos. So we're kind of feeling overwhelmed and we're frustrated with the chaos, but at the same time, we want ways to connect to the community. We want to feel less isolated. So already we're kind of extending on the initial issue that we had for the persona, that we had for townspeople in general, and showing how it would look for this persona in particular. So now that we've got a pretty good idea of the type of issue that this persona has, what do we think their main barriers are for addressing this issue? So what's getting in the way of them tackling the overwhelm and tackling the loneliness? Aside from the very obvious issue of the flood impacting the town. We might think about these more as behavioural barriers. Or if it's easier to start thinking about it from the motivator point of view, what might help? Got a few barriers coming through, sense of urgency is getting in the way, resistance, lack of trustworthy information, sense of shame, yep, situational stress. So there's a lot of emotions coming through. Yeah, they're too busy because they're really focused on efficiency. So while they're frustrated that things aren't getting done quickly, they themselves are busy trying to solve things. Powerless. Yeah. And what do we think might help? So what are the strengths that this persona has that they could leverage to help them address their issue in their way? Oh, I like that. Can't do everything themselves. That's a really nice combination of the efficiency and the social connection coming through. Okay, yep, control would be nice. Resourcefulness, yep, they've lived in that same community for generations. Absolutely. First principles perspectives, what needs to happen first? Yes, need a plan. See a couple of people just finishing up their points. But we can see as we go through this, we've started out with a really organisational focused issue from our point of view as the financial counsellor. Then we've kind of unpicked that and had a look at what is it from the user point of view. And then we've taken a particular type of user who has very specific values and we've fleshed them out a little bit more. And already looking through the issues, the barriers, the motivators here, I can see some ideas for how we might co-create a solution with these people. And I'm sure you're probably thinking similarly as well. So planning and community is coming through really, really strong. So cutting through that sense of overwhelm, sense of isolation by leveraging that community connection that this person has and appealing to their sense of efficiency by saying, start here first. Here is the plan. We have a solid, trustworthy plan with steps, reduce that cognitive load that they're experiencing while they are really stressed. Yeah, okay, so I'll leave that one open as well for anyone who wants to pop in there and just swing back to the slides. Cheers, yep. Yeah, that is the wrong window. Not that there are any notes to see, but it's a bit small on the screen if I do that. Let me switch to the different one. Share this one. Having to flick through is making me wish I did fewer than 43 slides. But we're almost towards the end now. Okay, so we've started to craft a bit of a persona around this particular townsperson. If we had more time, we would look at, what are the different values and experiences of the townspeople in general, and are there perhaps a few different personas that are emerging who would need different interventions and different support options for them. So the next guideline is to revise the language. So the language that we use when talking about consumers experiencing vulnerability should focus on the issue and not the person. Language should be relatable. It should resonate with the customers themselves, especially if it's front-facing. So a little kind of rule of thumb that I always find useful is I flick through the documents that we're using and I think to myself, if I were to send this out to the participants who helped us to co-create this, to co-design this, is there anything in there that they would find, to be really deficit-based or overly complex or full of jargon, or just something that they wouldn't want to associate themselves with, something that's not very strengths-based? And that's a good lens to go through. So particularly flicking through and thinking, would I be happy to have, this particular persona description for me? So if anyone, when did the Women's Butterfly Project quiz, when you got your butterfly result or your persona result, it should come out that every possible option is still a positive and really highlights the strengths that that persona brings to the table. So this is what I'm calling an activity for later, because obviously as part of our hypothetical project with the townspeople and flood, we don't have project documents. But if you have project documents, a good idea is to every now and then just go back through and look for the deficit-based language, look for jargons, look for phrases or words that you wouldn't want to be front-facing. So when we were working on the housing project for the mature women, we would often find that, in one of our project documents, we'd said, this persona has problems with, or this persona lacks, or homelessness would come up a lot long after we'd actually switched the terms to more strengths-based terms. So going back and doing that review, it sounds a little dull, but it is really important. And you will find things every time. I have heard myself slip into deficit a couple of times, even during this presentation. So it's always good to reflect. And then as part of the next phase, which we'll talk about, it's reporting back to your team and talking about it and critiquing ourselves and our own approaches and our own lenses that we're bringing. So this is part of rewiring the brain through reflection, using reflective and critical practice to keep all members of the team on the same page. So we want to be aware of biases that might creep into our thinking that we're not aware of, and maintain an open environment so that team members can be really open about revisiting old ground and finding things that they'd like to change. So we should be in a team where we've said, look, we're really open. We like to critique our own approach. We like to revisit things so that no one in the team feels like they can't say, that document that we finalised 2 months ago, I found some things in there that, looking back, I think we can say in a better way. So this links to the second activity, which is, as a team, once you've reviewed your documents and you found some things you'd like to change, talk about what the current words say about the team mindset. Is there anything that could or should be changed to come from a more strengths-based lens, and whether choices and adjustments made actually align with the preferred mindset. So is there a reason why or why not we want to use a particular term, and just talk about what that means and what type of approach we're coming from. And the last guideline is around redesigning methods. So when we're selecting methods for research and or designing the program, we want to look for ways that leverage the strengths of our stakeholders. So we've spoken a lot about the organisation and the user, but in reality, there are a lot of different stakeholders involved particularly in large projects, and we have to think about what do each of them bring to the project. So our consumers who are experiencing vulnerability, they are obviously bringing to the project their expertise of their own experience. They're bringing authenticity, and they'll be bringing other strengths as well, depending on their characteristics. So when we were doing the hypothetical with the townspeople, we said, well, they're really connected to the community. They've got the contacts that they can leverage. They've got inbuilt resilience, they've got friendships, they've got, you know, mateship because they're sharing houses and that kind of thing. So these are all strengths that come to the project, and also tell us a little bit about how we might want to engage with those people. It's ideal, of course, to have all stakeholders involved in every part of the process, but that isn't always realistic. So if you can imagine engaging in a co-design project to try and solve our initial issue of people not engaging with our advertising, we've identified that the townspeople are not in a position where they're going to want to be engaging in workshops with us for hours. So how might we best access their expertise while still respecting the current constraints on their time and recognizing the strengths that they're bringing to the table? So we try and get a balance by thinking about what's necessary to achieve the project goals while keeping in mind what is ethical and what's possible. So the very last activity, and we may not actually finish this one, but I'll leave it available for anyone who wants to access it, is thinking back to the case study. Who do we think are the main stakeholders? What are the main strengths that they offer, and how and when should they be involved? I'll throw the Padlet link into the chat. And I've put an example in there as well. I might not actually switch to sharing the Padlet because we're almost towards the end and I don't want to take you on the resharing journey and make you see all 42 slides again. So the example that I've given in the Padlet is one stakeholder might be the local news agency. So we've done a stakeholder analysis and we've figured out that that's one of our stakeholders. The strengths that they have is they have an existing communications network that has operated throughout natural disasters before. They know how to get the word out. In terms of the how and when, this stakeholder needs to be engaged kind of in the middle of the process once we know what we want to say, and then they can perhaps advise the best way to communicate and get the message out. We want to recognise that they are also rebuilding their business and they also live in the town. So they will have limited time resources, but they have that key strength of being able to advise on how to get the word out most efficiently in these types of situations. So that's an example of the type of thing that I mean when I say thinking about all of the different stakeholders, the strengths that they bring to the table, and how and when in the process we should be bringing them in. So for anyone who wants to comment on that, I have left the Padlet open, but also recognising that we're almost at the hour now. So I will call for any questions or any comments. I'll keep an eye on the chat as well. And of course, thank you all so much for coming and being a part of this today. Oh, and I should also say to everyone, I'll just put in the chat, that during the final panel today, they'll be doing an audience reflections on the day. So if there are any aha moments, please pop those through that Slido. Oh, thanks everyone. Thanks, Margaret. Thanks, Janet. Thank you, William. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And thank you for humouring me and engaging with the hypothetical and jumping in and brainstorming on the Padlets and in the polls as well. It really makes the session so much better. Thank you very much, everyone. If anyone has any questions that you think of later, please feel free to email me using the contact details in the program. Other than that, thank you all so much for being here, and please enjoy the rest of the symposium.